So over the next half an hour or so, I will be restricting myself primarily to authorship and pseudojournals. So two issues which very specifically relate to publication-related misconduct rather than pure research misconduct. And to understand the concept of misconduct, the most important thing to understand is why is there misconduct? Why do people cheat? Misconduct is another nice way of saying cheat. Why do people cheat? There are two ends of the spectrum to what we call misconduct. One end of the spectrum is what we call honest mistakes. So people make mistakes. That's fine. You make mistakes. You end up having certain complications as a result of that mistake. Your study may not be valid. Your study may have to be redone. That's one end of it. The other end of the misconduct is the one that we worry about more. And that's the one where we typically will call cheating. So therefore, why do people write a paper only to cheat? What is the big deal? You don't get paid for it. In fact, most of us don't get paid for it. You do some research, you write a paper. There is nothing in it other than to get your name on a paper. Therefore, why would you cheat? Why would there be misconduct? And that brings in the question of why do people write? What is the importance of authorship? The importance of authorship will define the next two topics that I am discussing, which is authorship and pseudojournals and misconduct. And the reason everybody writes is because everybody wants to be the golden egg. There is a large population of people within your specialty, within your area of work, and you would like to be the one who stands out among all your peers. It's a very basic requirement. Every human endeavor is to either make money for themselves or to make name for themselves. And money also is actually a way of making name for yourself. Everybody wants a name for themselves. That name is called authorship. And that is the importance that authorship has, particularly in scientific circles, where the only way of making a name for yourself is to have your name on a piece of paper. There are other ways of being famous. In fact, there are two ways of being famous. The other common way of being famous is the path that I'm showing you here. If you speak loud enough, speak at multiple places, go on to things called webinars, and you just pronounce it to everybody that I'm a celebrity. At some point of time, people will start believing you. They've seen you at multiple places, your name appears on multiple WhatsApp chats, you write a comment everywhere, you hold seminars, webinars, you send videos, you post videos, or in other words, social media celebrities. That's one kind of celebrity. The second kind of celebrity is the celebrity which is far more hard work. This is the celebrity which requires you to pass through a bunch of people, so-called peer reviewers, who are preventing you from publishing your work. Because once you do publish, once you do become that author that I was talking about, that's the other path of celebrity. So these are the two typical paths of celebrity that you would see, particularly in health sciences and academia. The important thing is to realize that if you've attained your celebrity through your authorship, through your research, through your publications, it's very easy to transition over and become famous. On the other hand, it is virtually impossible to get a paper published just because you're a social media celebrity. Therefore, for academia, the path to success remains authorship, research, publications. And therefore, there is a lot of value placed on what is authorship. You would have heard of the organization called the ICMJ, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. This is the organization that oversees most things in medical publishing. And they have a very well-defined statement on who deserves to be an author on a paper. The most important aspect of this definition is this word responsibility. The whole context, the whole objective of authorship is responsibility. Now let me put this in perspective. Let's assume you went to the market to buy, let's say, a box of pens. You were promised that this box has 10 pens. Each pen costs 100 rupees, so you paid 1,000 rupees for a box of 10 pens. You came back home, you opened the box and you found that it had only 8. 2 of them were missing. what would you do? Most people would actually go back and ask that this box has only 8, I want another 2. I paid for 10, I should get 10 back. That's what most of us would do. On the other hand, when you read a paper that says 100 patients were treated and with this particular drug or with this particular surgery, and we had an 85% success rate, you never go back and check. You never go to that institution and check whether they actually treated 100 patients, how many improved. You never write a letter to the author. You never ask them. You never question them about the truth behind their statement. You believe it. It's published in a journal. It's gone through peer review. Therefore, it must be the truth. Therefore, since nobody is cross-checking what you write on a paper, it is always assumed to be the truth. Your responsibility increases. Whenever you know that you are expected to speak the truth, you are expected to present data, you're unlikely to be verified by somebody else, your responsibility increases much more. That is the concept behind authorship. Since it is very rarely cross-verified, the onus or the responsibility on the authors to present the truth is far greater. Therefore, you shouldn't be an author unless you can be absolutely sure that the paper is truthful. Now, defining this whole statement as a concept is easy. Writing it as philosophy is easy. But translating it into real life becomes difficult. How do I define this concept of belief, truth? Therefore, to make it easier for people to apply it in their everyday practice, the IC&JE has come up with 4 criteria. What they state is that if you fulfill all 4 criteria, you can qualify to become an author. I've listed 3 here. These 3 are the older criteria which have been in existence for a very long time. They basically talk about saying that you must have intellectually contributed to the research, you must have contributed to the writing of the paper, you must have approved what is written so that you cannot later say that I did this work, this is what my results were, but the paper says something else. Therefore, the paper may be false, but my results were different. You can't say that. You have to accept responsibility to say, I have read the paper, I know what is being written, I guarantee it's the truth. These are the classic 3 criteria. And about 10 years ago, a 4th criteria was introduced. And this is actually a very important criteria, which states that not only are you responsible for your own self, you have to be responsible for all parts of the work. Now, what does that mean? Let me give you a practical example again. I'm a surgeon, I'm a urologist. Let's assume that I have a student who's doing an MCH and he does a thesis. And the thesis is to look at blood markers, or let's just say PSA levels in prostate cancer. So he draws the blood sample, sends it to a lab where another collaborator with us is looking at certain isoforms of PSA. We get the report back and we write a paper saying that these are the isoforms of PSA in prostate cancer. A few days after the paper is published, we get a letter from somebody, a reader, who says that your results are wrong. The isoforms that you've reported of PSA have never been done in your lab. Your lab is not capable of doing this. Therefore, your data is wrong. Now, I as a clinician could easily stand up and say, how am I responsible? I am only the clinician who drew the blood sample. My resident only drew the blood sample. We sent it to the lab. How do I know that the lab doesn't do the sample? Or it could be the other way around. The complaint could be these patients were never prostate cancer. The lab person could very well get up and say, how am I responsible? I don't know where the patients came from. I don't know what their diagnosis is. The clinician took the sample, sent it to me. I've only done the PSA test. How can you blame me that half these patients didn't have cancer? Therefore, who is responsible? The answer ultimately is all of us are responsible. When this paper gets published and somebody, let's say in North America, reads this paper, they don't know that my lab is good or bad. They don't know whether the clinician is dependable or not dependable. It is for me who's working on this subject locally to know that my lab can do this work, that they are honest, confident people. The lab people have to have confidence in me that this guy, if he says it's prostate cancer patient that I'm taking a sample for, he's likely to be speaking the truth and the patient is likely to be prostate cancer. It's only the 2 of us who know what the other person does. Somebody in North America doesn't know what we are and what we are capable of. So if it's a urologist who's reading the paper and the urologist trusts me, he trusts me and therefore he has to trust my lab. Therefore, I must trust my lab. Similarly, if it's a lab person reading the paper and knows the laboratory person in names and who's working and trusts him, he has to trust me to be giving the right paper. Therefore, all of us have to accept responsibility for everything that goes on the paper. That is the importance of authorship. So who should not be an author? Anybody who does not fulfill these requirements that I just talked about, but gets their name on the paper, is called a guest author. Similarly, there is another bunch of people who actually should be authors because they fulfill all those criteria, but they are not put on the paper. So why does this happen? Why do people who deserve to be authors not get authors? And people who don't deserve to be authors get authors. Why and why is this a problem? Let's look at some of these circumstances. One of the common reasons why people become guests on papers is because everybody believes they should be pleased. They should be given credit. Sometimes it's a senior person in your department. You want to keep her happy. You want to keep him happy, and you think I'm going to give them a gift authorship or a guest authorship. At other times, you're actually trying to use their name. You know that if I submit a paper to a journal and one of the authors is the senior person whom everybody knows, my paper might have a higher chance of getting accepted. It doesn't always happen, but there is always this feeling. Therefore, you bring in somebody on the paper who doesn't deserve to be an author. That's called a guest authorship. And that is a problem because at the end of the year, if 5 people have put the same person's name on their paper, but that person actually knows nothing about the subject, at the end of the year, the expert is that person who knows nothing about the subject. You are not an expert. And therefore, when decisions need to be made or when consultations need to be held, you won't become the expert. The person who actually knows nothing about the subject becomes the expert. The second aspect is the one that we worry about equally, and that's the concept of ghost authorship. So let me again give you an example to explain this. Let's assume you read a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. This is an excellent study, beautifully done, scientifically, ethically. Everything has been beautifully done. There is no doubt about the quality of the research or the quality of the work that's been done. And the studies concludes that drug X is better than drug Y. It was comparing 2 drugs. If you read a paper like this, many of us would like to believe the paper and would probably start using drug X in our. Now let's assume that another few weeks down the line, another study appears. Another beautifully done study, no doubt about the quality of the research or the study. This paper now says drug X is not better than drug Y. Now this happens in research. Sometimes you get one study which says it is good, another study which says it isn't good. When we read this, most of us would now become ambivalent. We think maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. I'm not quite sure. Now let's assume that a few days down the line, a newspaper report comes out that the study which found that drug X is better was actually, and one of the authors owns the company that makes drugs. What happens to us now? All of a sudden, we completely disregard study. We start study 1. We start assuming that since this guy makes the drug, the study that he has done will obviously show that his drug is good. And that is the only reason that paper said that this drug is good. But otherwise, the drug is probably not good. And therefore, all of us will no longer believe in that. Now, go back for a minute. Before I told you that he owns shares, we believed it. I said that the study was good. The research was good. It was ethically done, robust methodology. Just because this person owns shares in it, we've suddenly discredited his research. We've suddenly decided this study is useless. This becomes a problem because this person also knows this. He also knows that if my name is on the paper and then people realize that I own the company, they won't believe my research. They won't let my drug sell. Therefore, what does he do? He publishes the paper without his name on the paper. That is a ghost authorship. And the problem with the ghost authorship concept is the reaction we just had that because he owns shares, the research may not be as good was actually right. That's what's called a conflict of interest. And it's been evidently proven through multiple research studies that when there is a conflict of interest, the results of a study may not truly reflect the real situation. This is what is called ghost authorship. And this becomes relevant to many of you young researchers. What will typically happen is that you will have maybe a medical representative or a friend in the industry who will come and give you some data. He will come and tell you that I know that you're a good researcher, you're working at SGPGI, therefore I know you know how to do research. Can you just look at some of this data that we have collected? You look at the data, you make some suggestions, and you think that this is fine. I think it's a good study, you can publish it. The person goes away, comes back 2 days later and says, unfortunately, we don't have anybody to write the paper. Can you write it? You certainly look at the data looks nice. This is a friend, you're getting a free paper, and you write a paper. And you put your name on that paper. What have you done? You've just now created ghost authors. The people who've actually done the research, who actually know whether it's truthful or not, are not even authors on this paper. They have become ghost authors. And you have just now stamped as truth something which you can never be sure was the truth. This is the problem with authorship when you don't consider the implications of either putting your name or keeping your name away from the authorship byline. So this creates non-experts, and we know that names sell paper. Unfortunately, despite how good peer review is, how good editors may be, names do sell papers. And of course, there are benefits. You can get pharma benefits, academic benefits by putting your name on a paper, and that forces people to put in their name at places where they actually shouldn't have their name. So there are lots of people at times who help you to do your research. They may be a head of the department, a senior colleague, a junior colleague who's helped you collect data, who's helped you gather funding. All these people are important to your research. Your research may not have happened without them, but they're not all. You need to acknowledge their help. You can acknowledge their contribution. All this goes in the acknowledgement section of the paper, not by making them authors. So anybody who gave you writing assistance, technical help, study design, all kinds of help. The study may require tons of help. All of them can be acknowledged, but not as authors. That's not the way of giving recognition to a person who's helped you. There is this concept of what's called contributorship, where many journals will ask you to define what each person did. It is just an expanded form of authorship. You can't just say that this person is an author. You have to explain why they are authors. You have to give more descriptions. So this is now progressively more common way in which papers are to be accepted. And it's just an expansion of the standard authorship format. When it comes to where should my name be? So typically, there are two positions which are given more respect than other positions. Theoretically, everybody is contributed equally. Theoretically, if there are 6 authors on a paper, everybody is equal. But we know by practice and by convention that the first author and the last author are generally considered the more important people. The first author should typically be the person who's done the maximum amount of work. So if it's a resident's thesis and the resident has written the paper, the resident is the first author, typically. On the other hand, the senior author or the corresponding author will often go to the end of the list. And most people would realize that this is the person who supervised the work, may actually be the person who's given the genesis to the idea, and is the senior person. And these are the general conventions on how your authorship name comes. 2, 3, 4, 5 is typically based on the degree of contribution they have had to that particular paper. So the bottom line, this is the last slide on authorship alone, is that you should at least follow the ICMJ guidelines. Authorship is a very vexed issue. As you become more senior, you get into colleagues, other faculty in the department, there will always be fights. Why is my name not on that paper? Why am I number 2 on that paper? Why is this person not given a name? Very vexed issues. Therefore, the best way of handling authorship is to decide it even before you start speaking. When you start a research and you're working with 2 or 3 people, your understanding with them should be clear. This paper will be written, this person will be the first author, I will be the last author, you will be in between and stuff like that. Best to get it right in the beginning on an email so that everybody is fully aware of who's going to be where on a particular thing. So I'll come do the second part also, which is on pseudojournals, before I take questions. So this is I've showed you this slide before, and I'm showing it to you again because it's a very important slide. This is what is a normal author's perspective. Once you've done all this hard work, you've done research, many of you have spent 2.5 years, whether it's on a thesis or on a research project, gathering data, analyzing it, writing it up. And now there is this bunch of reviewers and editors who are stopping you from publishing. You submit papers, you make diagrams, you make tables, they throw it back at you. 9 times out of 10 that you submit a paper, it comes back. So there is this bunch of people who are preventing you from writing, from publishing. And many a times there are deadlines. Let's assume you're appearing for an interview for faculty. Let's assume you're finished, you're doing a senior residency and you're appearing for an interview for a faculty. You need papers. You're going for a promotion. You need papers. And all these people are stopping you from publishing. Therefore, what do? You therefore look for the easy way out. My research is already done. Everything is ready. This particular X journal that everybody thinks is good is too good for me. Doesn't want to publish me. But I know that there are 5 others, or there are 8 other journals. I actually get an email every day, maybe 4 emails every day from these journals which want me to submit to them. Why can't I just go and submit to them? That's also a journal. I'll get published. I can show publication, and my job is done. These are conditions, or not conditions, but these are journals or so-called journals, which most of us would call fake journals. And why do we call them fake journals? Because the whole concept of publication was to get quality, research of quality. When quality is not the criteria, when the only criteria is money, they don't care what quality of research you've done. All you need to do is pay them 1,000 rupees. Sometimes it's as small as 1,000 rupees, 3,000, 5,000, 20,000. We don't care what your quality is. Just give us the money and we'll publish you. That's what we call fake journals. So why is this wrong? At the end of the day, it's being put out into the public domain. People will read it and decide for themselves whether my research was good or bad. Just because 5 peer reviewers think it is bad doesn't make it bad. So why can't I just publish it? Now I'll take you back to one of my first few statements about authorship and responsibility. Authorship is all about trust. There is no verification of data. We've talked about it. It's all about trust. And the hallmark of validating this trust is through a concept called peer review, which means that you've submitted your research, a bunch of colleagues will look at it and decide whether it's worth it. Now, all of us know that peer review is extremely flawed. There are huge problems with peer review. Good editors will tell you that half the times papers that they've rejected could very well have been accepted, and papers that they've accepted should have been rejected. All of us have had the experience that your paper has been rejected from 4 places but does get accepted at the 5th place. So obviously everything will somehow go around and possibly get accepted. And therefore peer review is not perfect. It's flawed. Nonetheless, there is nothing better that we have. There is no other way today of judging the quality of science or publication other than by what a bunch of peers or colleagues think about. And therefore, the hallmark of a good journal is a journal that does good peer review. A journal that evaluates your research or submissions scientifically and lets them get published only when they've been scientifically validated. Only then do we consider the journal to be good. And this is where the pseudo journals fall. They do not do peer review. Well, they claim to do it. They'll say we are doing peer review. They'll say we're doing double blind peer review. We'll send it out to peer reviewers. We'll do it in 3 days. We'll do it in 7 days. The fact is, as long as you're willing to give them the money, everything will get published. That is what we call pseudo publishing. It used to be called predatory publishing. When this whole concept became evident about 15 years ago, this whole bubble blew up about 2010. It used to be called predatory journals or predatory publishing, because it was assumed that these journals are preying on the author's need to publish. So they are preying on the academicians. Over the last few years, we have realized that they're not just preying, authors are willing contributors. Authors know this is wrong, they know I should not be doing it, yet they go ahead and willingly do it. Therefore, it's no longer a relationship of a victim versus a predator. They're participants. Both parties are happy doing an exchange. Therefore, it's no longer predatory publishing, it's now called pseudo publishing. An important concept to understand here is that the whole problem is not money. Just because you're paying doesn't make it bad. It is because the only thing you need to do is pay that makes it bad. So many good journals, for example, PLOS, many of the Biomed Central journals, will expect you to pay. It is called an article processing charge. Sometimes it's huge, it's lakhs of rupees at times to publish an article in one of these good journals. And therefore, you could ask the question that I have to pay here also. This guy is only charging me 3,000. Why is he bad? Just because that guy charges 1 lakh, is he good? No. The difference is that even if you give that guy 1 lakh, he won't publish you unless your science is good. This guy, even if you don't give him 3,000 and you bargain for 2,000, he'll publish you for 2,000 also, irrespective of what your quality. So the difference is not that you have to pay. The difference is that there is no quality check. It is only a payment which gets you published, and that's what the pseudo journals are all about. So the concept of predatory has now changed. It's no longer called predatory. Most of us are now calling them pseudo journals, because I think in the last 10 to 15 years, there has been enough education of potential authors that this is wrong. Just like you guys are sitting in a hall today and listening to what this is, there have been decades of people before you who have now learned that this is wrong. Yet they go ahead and do it. Therefore, you can no longer blame the journals alone. Now we will blame all authors also, because they've been taught that this is wrong, yet they go and do it. Therefore, they are willing partners, and this is now pseudo-publish. So how do you identify a pseudo journal or a predatory journal? Sometimes it becomes very difficult. All these journals have become progressively smarter. They realize they've heard all these lectures that we give, and not just ours, everybody else's lectures. And they've heard these lectures and made themselves better. They've taken away all the things we say that they don't do. But typically, what would they do? They would publish on multiple subjects, random subjects. They guarantee publication. They claim peer review will be done in 3 days, 5 days. Some of them will not give you the article charges upfront, and they'll tell you the charges only after 5 or 7 days. Multiple things. Large journals, massive editorial boards. All these are some of the features which make you think that this journal may not really be a true journal. Now, these are some of the examples. Now, these are very old. I think it's a 2016 email that I'm showing. It's already 7 years old. So big journals, lots of things. And they said you can submit an article. Let me just read what this email said. You can submit articles on bioengineering, biomedicine, cardiology, chiropody, ENT, pharmacy, dentistry, everything. No matter what you want to write, we will publish everything. They asked for a submission on the 10th of January and they guaranteed a publication on the 15th of January after a double-blind peer review. But where is the peer review? The only peer review that happens in 2 days is a desk rejection. You send a paper, editor rejects, throws it back, useless paper. That's the only peer review that happens in 2 days. Then they will keep bombarding you again and again. They'll keep sending you an email. We wrote to you, you did not reply, they'll write to you again. If you don't reply to me again, I'll write to you once again. So it's called badgering. They'll keep writing to you. Let's submit something, anything. Give us a paper. So anything. Pharmacology, toxicology. I'm a urologist. They're addressing me like a urologist, but give me anything. I have a deadline coming. I have an issue coming. Give me one paper. Give me anything. Give me 2 pages. Most of them will have a US address. And I'll tell you another beautiful scam. That's how people have improved. People thought they were smart. So they started using Google Earth to see whether this place exists. And this place exists. They're well-known institutions. They exist. The name is correct. Institution is correct. And they exist on Google Earth. So they have all smart ways of impressing their potential victims. Many of them have now got websites which look exactly like a real journal. You have to be careful. Some of them have actually become criminal and they've actually hijacked original websites. So there are police complaints against such individuals. There are big names. They put in their editorial board, large names. You would recognize them. And those people have never agreed to be on it. And these guys will not remove their names even if they're right. They will have fake academics and they will have random addresses indexing impact factors. There is this organization called Index Copernicus, Poland-based, which started indexing everything under the sun for a certain amount of payment. Unfortunately, our Medical Council of India about 5-8 years ago was accepting Index Copernicus, and therefore it gave them an even greater impetus to start indexing everything under the sun. So this concept of indexed became any index. Whereas for an academic, the concept of an index is only that which is indexed either on Thomson Reuters, Science Citation Index, or listed on PubMed, which is also an accepted PubMed indexing. It's not actually an index, but listing on PubMed. So these are the only indexes that true academicians will recognize, but these are now everybody is selling an index. So another example, impact factor 2.8. There is only one impact factor which is of value, and that is the impact factor that is again given by a science citation index or journal citation reports. All other impact factors are considered fraud, but then that's what they're doing. Index Copernicus, high impact factor. So this was about predatory publishing. Now we look at the other side, which is also called predatory writing. This is an email I received a little while back, asking me that if I had some data, they will write it for me. On the other hand, if I did not want to give them data, they will send me data, I can write for them. It doesn't matter which way it works. I will write for you, you write for me, everybody can make a payment, everybody is happy. So this is now predatory writing. You don't even have to have research. You can just call them, want a paper, papers published. These are called paper mills. They exist all around the world. There is zero data and beautiful papers. And this is what is happening to your students. Many of you may have done this as well. Thesis writing. Who wants to get into the trouble of thesis writing? All you need to do is tell this organization, this is my department, this is my research topic, 2 years down the line, data ready, this is ready. If you are a little more honest, you will say, okay, I'll give you the data, you can write the paper. And the most honest guy will say, okay, I've written the paper, you can correct it and give it back to me. So all levels depends on how much money you want to pay. All this is called pseudo writing or predatory. The third aspect of predatory publishing, predatory writing is predatory conferences. You published a paper or somebody knows that you work in an institution, you will get an email inviting you to be a plenary speaker at this beautiful sounding conference. It's always international, at this beautiful location in Hawaii, in Bali, in Singapore, excellent conferences, and you are suddenly impressed. All I did was show a small abstract in a small regional conference, and now this big conference wants me to be a plenary speaker on that topic. You are happy to say yes. Once you say yes, they will send you a link that book our hotel from this site. You will think, no, I'm smart. This guy will take my money. I'll check on Make My Trip. You go to Make My Trip. The hotel costs 20,000 rupees. This guy is offering it for 17,000. Okay, it's a genuine hotel. I'll book for him. 70,000 bucks gone. This guy also says, book your tickets through me. You look on the website. The other guy is selling it for 50,000. This guy is selling you conference discount if you take it through my link. 20% conference discount if you take it through my link. Take it through their link. The link takes you to a fake website. 50,000 minus 20%, 40,000, dead and gone. Huge scams. People have gone on these conferences, and the only people who sat in that conference were the 8 people who were invited to present. Nobody else is present. So this has now become a huge problem. This is a rather old paper now, 8 years old. I haven't seen a newer paper with this amount of data. But what it showed was the massive growth in pseudojournal. And it's everywhere. We used to think it's India. Unfortunately, it originated in India, but it's now grown everywhere. India is now contributing less than 25-30% of the entire problem. Everywhere there is a problem, excuse me. So why should you bother? The reason you should bother is it's extremely detrimental to your academic future. If you published a paper in one of these journals, and you realize that the journal that I have published it in pseudo, I have one advice to you. Assume that that paper is dead. Never mention it anywhere. If you write that paper on your CV and you appear for an interview and you're unfortunate enough to get somebody like me on the interview panel, and I see a pseudo paper written on your CV, I will have one of two assumptions about you. One, you think I am a fool, that I don't realize that this is a pseudo paper and I will give you credit for it. I'm not a fool. So that is one problem. The second problem is I will think you are a fool, that if you are publishing in a journal like this, why should I recruit you for a faculty because you will teach the same thing to my students? Either case, neither am I a fool nor are you a fool, and you lose your credibility and you've lost your data. So if you publish in one of these journals, assume that that paper is dead, that data is dead. They will never give the data back to you. They will never allow you to withdraw the paper. Just never mention it. So the better idea is don't submit to such journals. Sometimes it becomes very difficult to identify what these pseudo journals. So there are certain websites which can help. So one of them is the World Association of Medical Editors, or PAMI. You can go to their website. They will give you ideas on how to identify a pseudo journal. You can look at good indices. For example, if it's on PubMed, if it's on Science Citation Index, if it's on Directory of Open Access Journal, there is a much higher chance that it's a genuine journal. Over the last few years, unfortunately, there have been problem journals identified even on good indexes, but the number is much. Finally, there is a website called thinkchecksubmit.org. It shows you a process of how to evaluate journals and their websites. And again, it becomes relatively easier to decide whether this journal is okay. So this is the bottom line. Most of us in our hearts know what we are doing is wrong. You don't really need somebody else to tell you what you're doing is wrong. And if you think what you're doing is wrong, probably is wrong. And therefore, it is better to avoid it and start looking at an alternative option. So thank you very much.